HOA called my carport a neutral zone. Then they held weekly HOA board meetings under my roof, without asking. They rewrote the bylaws, I rewrote the boundaries. They brought folding chairs, I brought a tow truck and a camera. Now I run the HOA, and their throne room has a lock on it. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. I bought this house for the quiet. The kind of quiet you can hear in your bones. The way the wind moves through trees when no one's watching. The whisper of a hose left running 2 doors down. The slow creak of my front porch after a long walk and a longer day. I'm not the sort to go looking for drama. I like clean lines, solid locks, and knowing that my space is my own. So when I first moved into Oakcrest Estates, I kept to myself. Smiled when smiled at. Waved back when waved to. But that was about it. I noticed the HOA board right away. Oh, you couldn't miss them. Every Saturday at 10 a.m., 3 clipboard-wielding suburban monarchs patrolled the cul-de-sac like they were conducting military exercises. Measuring grass blades, peeking behind fences, taking photos of trash bins set out too early. They wore khakis and judgment like a uniform. Still, I stayed out of it. I paid my dues, read the rules, even trimmed my hedges to the recommended height. All I wanted was peace. Then on a Tuesday afternoon, not long after I'd settled in, I came home to something strange. There were folding chairs in my carport, not 1 or 2, 6 of them, arranged in a circle like some strange suburban seance was about to begin. A long folding table had been dragged up beside my toolbox, with a pitcher of lemonade sweating onto a stack of paper agendas. I stood there, keys in hand, heart thudding. The HOA president, her name was Barbara, but she always introduced herself as President Marlin for clarity, smiled at me from under her wide-brimmed sun hat. "Oh, you're home early," she said, like I was the one intruding. "I live here," I replied. She laughed. "Of course you do. It's just temporary. We needed some shade and your carport is so perfectly neutral. It's right in the middle of the block. Ideal." That word, neutral, tasted like rust in my mouth. I asked if this had been approved. She waved the question away like it was a gnat. "It's community space," she said, gesturing vaguely. "We're all part of Oakcrest. What's yours is ours, right?" I stood there in silence as the other board members trickled in. Dale, the treasurer, with his cologne cloud and Bluetooth earpiece. Lydia, secretary, wearing a sweater set and eyes that scanned me like I was an overgrown shrub. They didn't ask to come in. They just sat down, popped open a Tupperware of deviled eggs, and called the meeting to order. That night, I couldn't sleep. My carport, my space smelled like onion dip and old vinyl. I checked the rules 3 times, reread my deed, even walked the perimeter in my slippers, just to prove to myself that this land was mine. The next day, I approached Barbara again, politely, respectfully. "I'd prefer the board not meet in my carport," I said. Her expression didn't change, not even a flicker. "Well, we're trying to be efficient with space," she replied. "And as a new resident, I'd hope you'd want to contribute. Be generous. It's community first here." I mentioned boundaries, she mentioned spirit. I brought up privacy, she countered with neighborly cooperation. By the end of the conversation, I was the villain for not sharing. Word spread, whispered. "Of course. This neighborhood runs on passive aggression and over-the-fence gossip." I caught the looks. One woman across the street offered me a sympathetic smile as she watered her hydrangeas, while another shook her head like I'd slapped a puppy. And so, every Tuesday evening, they came back. Chairs, snacks, meeting minutes, laughter that echoed under my roof. My driveway slowly transformed into a makeshift town hall while I sat inside watching from behind closed blinds like some recluse in my own home. I started parking on the street, just to avoid them. My carport, my boundary had been annexed. They said it was just temporary. But temporary things have a way of turning permanent when the people in charge stop listening, and everyone else just watches. I wasn't ready to fight. But I started paying attention. And I never forget what I see in silence. Every Tuesday night, like clockwork, they came. 6 o'clock sharp, heels clicking, chair legs scraping, clipboards snapping open like weapons. They didn't knock, didn't ask. didn't even pretend to be guests anymore. They swept into my carport like royalty returning to court. Barbara at the head, sunglasses perched atop her hair like a crown, lips pursed in permanent self-satisfaction. Each week, the scene grew worse. They brought more folding chairs, a portable speaker, and even a little podium someone had painted HOA blue. I came home once to find a whiteboard leaning against my recycling bins, with Oak Rest HOA agenda scrawled in neon marker. They started leaving things behind too. Used coffee cups, empty water bottles, pens. Once, someone even left a half-eaten bag of trail mix wedged behind my gardening bench. But the worst was the paperwork. HOA documents. Unsigned, unsealed, just scattered across my shelves like confetti. Budgets, complaints, proposed fines for other residents. One note that said, discuss garage paint issue Wadslot 34, which was my house. I filed a formal complaint. I sent emails. I printed out sections of the HOA handbook and highlighted phrases like private property and member consent. Nothing changed. In fact, things escalated. It happened in one of their smug little meetings while I watched from inside my kitchen window. Barbara tapped her pen against her pad, cleared her throat, and read from a paper titled Bylaw Addendum 6B. Temporary public easement, she announced. Effective immediately, non-essential structures like carports may serve as shared meeting zones when deemed beneficial to community harmony. Any objection must be filed with a supermajority petition, 72-hour notice, and board approval. They nodded like parrots. Dale chimed in with that smirking voice of his. This is why we lead. We adapt. We serve the people. They all laughed, and then they voted. Right there, in my carport. A vote to turn my property into their throne room. I stood frozen on the other side of the glass, clutching my coffee mug like a lifeline. I remember the handle dug into my palm, and I didn't even feel it. That night, I didn't sleep again, but I didn't just toss and turn. I opened my laptop. I read everything. Every article I could find on zoning laws, property rights, easement, misuse, HOA overreach. I dove into municipal codes, parcel maps, archived HOA amendments, their new bylaw. It wasn't even properly formatted. It cited a line that didn't exist in the original documents. It contradicted 2 other clauses. It was sloppy. I started keeping notes, time-stamped, date marked. I wrote down their words. I started recording audio from the window when they thought I wasn't home. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was building a case. He leaned on his rake, watching me with tired eyes. You're the new one they keep holding meetings on, he said. I nodded. Apparently, I live in Oakcrest Town Hall now. He snorted. I did 30 years as a city planner. These people couldn't write a compliant easement if it came with instructions. I looked up. What do you mean? He glanced around, then stepped closer. Their easement claim, it only applies if the structure isn't attached to the home. Yours is. You've got an integrated support beam that makes it part of the main dwelling. He gave a faint smile. They missed that. Bet they didn't check your original plat drawings either. Then he walked away. They missed something. That was all I needed to hear. I went back inside and pulled out my home inspection report. Sure enough, attached structure, listed and documented. I printed it, highlighted it, added it to my growing stack of folders. But the next Tuesday, they came back like nothing had changed. The laughter, the iced tea, the faint clatter of clipboard corners against my concrete floor. Only this time, I didn't look away. I didn't hide behind the blinds. I stood in my kitchen, eyes locked on Barbara's smug little posture, and whispered to myself, you built your empire on the wrong foundation. And I just found the crack. It's funny what desperation will make you good at. I never cared much for paperwork before. I'm more of a file it, forget it kind of person. But now, I read HOA documents like a thriller novel. Every paragraph was a clue, every clause a potential weapon, every badly stapled packet a ticking time bomb, waiting to misfire in someone else's hand. I started by pulling out the HOA welcome packet I'd shoved in the back of my filing cabinet months ago. Pages of bloated language about harmony, cooperation, and shared values, stuff that sounded noble until you realized it was code for control. But buried inside that packet Right between pet waste responsibility and driveway aesthetics, I found Clause 14 thought any recurring use of private property for community purposes, if exceeding 2 occurrences per calendar month, shall require written permission from the property owner and be subject to review by the board. I read it 3 times. Then I highlighted it. Then I circled it. 2 occurrences per month. They'd used my carport 6 times just this quarter. And not a single document, email, or post-it note bore my signature. I had them. But I wasn't about to stop there. I pulled up the county zoning portal. Oakcrest's parcel map was there. Public record, just waiting for someone to care enough to look. My house was marked clearly. Zone R3, private residential use. Attached carport, non-shared structure. A few clicks later, I pulled up the definitions and saw it in black and white. Private carports under R3 are considered extensions of residential dwelling units and are not eligible for temporary easement without owner consent. I actually laughed. Not a loud, victorious laugh. The kind you let out when your instincts are confirmed and your patience finally has teeth. Next, I combed through old HOA newsletters, those annoying little bulletins they'd shove into everyone's mailbox once a month with photos of flower beds and passive-aggressive reminders about trash bin etiquette. One in particular, dated 4 months before I moved in, caught my eye. The headline read, "New community flex space designated for outdoor meetings." There was a blurry photo of my carport taken from across the street, with an arrow and caption that read, "Neutral zone for open-air board sessions." I stared at it. My chest went tight. That wasn't just manipulation, that was misrepresentation, premeditated and packaged with a smile. That's when it hit me. They knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't an accident or a harmless misunderstanding. They had printed a lie, distributed it as fact, and used it to plant their flag on my property. I remembered the first time Barbara said it was just temporary, how she smiled when she said neutral. It was never temporary. It was conquest. And they'd written their invasion into the neighborhood narrative before I'd even signed the mortgage. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by open folders and printed maps. My inspection report. The plat drawing, screenshots from the zoning website, and annotated HOA newsletters, and in the center of it all, Clause 14 FAF, underlined twice, glowing like a secret door finally kicked open. I opened a blank notebook and began to write. 6 unauthorized meetings. 2 written permissions. 1 forged community space claim. 1 county zoning violation pending verification. 1 owner in full legal possession of the structure. It wasn't just about the carport anymore. It was about permission, mine, and how they had trampled it because they assumed I wouldn't look, that I wouldn't push back, that I'd stay in my lane while they paved over it. But they were wrong. I closed the notebook, pressed my palms against the cool surface of the table, and let the silence wrap around me. I'd felt powerless for weeks, humiliated, invaded, ignored. But in that moment, all of that dissolved into something sharper, more precise. They thought I wouldn't read. But I'm the daughter of a surveyor. I know how to measure silence. I knew now what they'd done, and more importantly, I knew what came next. Because when you build a throne room on someone else's land, all it takes is 1 clause, and the kingdom comes crashing down. Highlighted portions of Clause 4. The county's own definition of my carport as private, attached property, my plat map, my deed. At the bottom, I wrote a single sentence. I am requesting an investigation into the misuse of private residential property and potential misrepresentation of zoning designations by the Oakcrest HOA board. I walked out of that office not with fire in my chest, but calm, controlled, ready. Next came the cease and desist letter. It was drafted with sharp corners and short sentences. No fluff, just legal citations, dates, and documentation. I sent it via certified mail, email with read receipt. And just for good measure, taped it to Barbara's Lexus with painter's tape, right across the driver's side window. Centered. Unmissable. It read, "Effective immediately, you are instructed to cease all unauthorized use of my private property for HOA meetings or any community-related activities. Failure to comply will result in legal action, including but not limited to civil penalties, personal liability for trespassing, and damages." I signed it. She didn't respond. In fact, they doubled down. That week's HOA newsletter featured a cheery banner headline: Carport declared permanent meeting space. Thank you for your support. Underneath was a staged photo of Barbara and Dale sitting in their usual chairs, holding mugs like they were filming a morning talk show. It was pure theater, but underneath the smiles, I saw the desperation. They were bluffing, loudly. But I didn't respond publicly. I didn't challenge them at the meeting. I didn't even remove the newsletter from my mailbox. I just added it to the growing stack in my evidence binder. Because what they didn't know was that the wheels had already started turning. A few days later, I got a text from someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Allison, an old classmate who now worked as a records clerk for the county zoning board. Hey, just a heads up. A case opened last week flagged your address. Internal note says it's tied to an HOA misuse claim. Quiet investigation. Looks like someone up top took it seriously. I stared at the screen, my breath catching. It was happening. That's when I took my last quiet step. I installed a motion-activated camera in the carport. Not hidden in some shady way, just discreet. Nestled among the beams, angled perfectly at the meeting area. High resolution, night vision capable, synced to cloud storage. I didn't even have to check it. I just let it roll. Let the lens witness what I already knew. That Tuesday night, they arrived again. Chairs, clipboards, Dale's Bluetooth headset, Lydia's little bell she rang when the meeting was in session. I watched from my living room as Barbara unfolded her notes and started another round of announcements. Beneath a roof they didn't own, on land they'd never paid for, with rules they'd just made up. But this time, I wasn't the one being watched. They were. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, smiling. Not because it was over, because it had finally begun. The difference between being a victim and being a witness. One stays silent. The other presses record. I gave them every chance. I warned them in writing, in person, in tone sharp enough to shave marble. Cease and desist, I said. You do not have my permission, I wrote. Further use of my carport will be treated as trespass, I printed in bold, underlined, and hand-delivered with certified return receipt. But they didn't just ignore me. They laughed. The next Tuesday, they arrived early. Earlier than usual, like they were trying to make a point. Barbara strutted in, wearing a blazer like she was headed to Capitol Hill. Dale wore sunglasses despite the shade. Lydia wheeled in a cooler. I watched them from behind my curtain, same as before. But this time, I had a manila folder in one hand and a phone in the other. They set up with their usual self-satisfaction. Chairs unfolded, table popped open. HOA budget reports rustled in the wind like legal confetti. I let them get comfortable. I let them settle into their little performance, drink their iced tea, and bask in the illusion that my silence meant surrender. Then I made the call. The towing company I'd chosen wasn't just any local outfit. I'd vetted 3. The one I hired specialized in private property enforcement, fully licensed, with lightning-fast response and full legal indemnity, as long as I had the paperwork. And oh, I had the paperwork. Plat map? Check. Deed? Check. County zoning certificate? Check. Cease and desist copy? Check. Letter stating abandoned items on private property subject to removal without warning? Triple check. The truck pulled up exactly 13 minutes later. It was glorious. A low rumble down the street, slow and unmistakable, with the kind of hydraulic authority you can feel in your knee. The neighbors started to peek out. First 1, then 3, then 5. Phones came out. Windows cracked open. Barbara turned around just as the wrecker backed into the driveway. Her mouth opened. She stepped forward, one hand raised like she could stop it with a gesture. "Excuse me, what is this?" she snapped. The driver, mid-30s, calm, chewing gum like he was watching a rerun, pointed to the sign he'd magnetically slapped onto the side of the truck. Private property enforcement. By owner request. He didn't say a word, just loaded the first chair. Barbara lunged. "You can't do that. Those are HOA assets." I stepped outside then, calmly, folder in hand, voice level. "They were left on private property without permission. Repeatedly, I have notified the HOA in writing. You are now trespassing. Your items are being removed per civil code and with pre-authorization." Dale sputtered. "You can't just—" "I can," I said, "and I am." The driver stacked chairs like he was stocking shelves at a warehouse. Clean, efficient. The table was next. Lydia tried to grab her clipboard, but the driver held up a hand. Sorry, all items on site are subject to impound unless you can prove ownership. You'll get a receipt. Barbara's face was turning red. Not the sunburn kind. The ego kind. You'll regret this, she hissed. I stepped forward, handed her a fresh copy of the cease and desist, this one in a protective sleeve, and smiled. This isn't over, she snapped. I nodded. It's not, I said softly. It's documented. And with that, the truck pulled away. 6 chairs, 1 folding table, a stack of HOA-branded clipboards, and a cooler of uneaten sandwiches headed off down the road like trophies of a battle well won. The neighbors didn't share. That would have been too obvious. But I saw the looks, the tiny smiles, the sideways glances that said, finally. One man even gave me a thumbs up from his porch before slipping back inside. I walked back into my house, closed the door behind me, sat down and exhaled for the first time in weeks. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't stoop to their level. I just did what they never expected. I used their language. And now, the queen of the HOA no longer had a throne. That night, I sat in my living room with the windows open. Let the breeze move through the house the way it used to. No voices, no shuffling, no hijacked meetings. Just the sound of crickets and distant sprinklers. That was when the knock came. Soft, almost polite. I opened the door and found Lydia, the board secretary, standing there with a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. She looked tired. Smaller than I remembered. We just wanted to ask if you'd consider opening the carport again, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. It's become difficult to organize things. I leaned against the doorframe. You have the community center, I said. She shifted. Barbara doesn't like the lighting. I smiled. Then maybe Barbara should invest in a lamp. Her mouth twitched, almost like she wanted to laugh. Almost. But she nodded, turned, and left without another word. I closed the door gently. This wasn't just about my carport anymore. It never was. It was about respect, about boundaries drawn in more than property lines. And now for the first time, those boundaries were holding. Not with shouting. Not with threats. But with locks, laws, and a quiet kind of certainty that can't be voted away. It started with the sound of Velcro. The kind they use on government-issued bags. The kind you only notice when someone opens it with purpose. I was trimming the hedge outside my front gate when I heard it. A slow rip, followed by the low scrape of a clipboard being drawn from its sleeve. The man wore khakis. Not the HOA kind. These had a badge clipped to the pocket and a laminated county ID swinging from a lanyard around his neck. His car was parked at the end of the street, plain white with no logos, just a municipal plate and an official-looking antenna that hummed faintly in the sun. He didn't knock on doors. He didn't introduce himself. He walked directly toward the cul-de-sac's newest gathering, the HOA's makeshift recovery road, hastily moved to Dale's driveway 2 houses down after my gate became an immovable wall. Barbara was mid-sentence, gesturing over a clipboard like she was lecturing Congress, when the man approached. I stayed back, watching, listening. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He asked 3 questions, made 2 notes, then flipped to a printed packet with my address and parcel map, clearly visible in the top right corner. I caught the words unauthorized assembly, document manipulation, and zoning misclassification before Barbara's face paled. She tried to argue, waved her usual blend of arrogance and vague civic bluster. But this man didn't defer. He pulled out a small camera, clicked it on, and calmly read from the citation. Violation of Code 914-3. Misrepresentation of community use zones. Unauthorized use of private property for organizational purposes. Failure to obtain property owner consent. He issued the citation on paper and took photographs. Not just of the meeting, of the HOA bulletin board, of Dale's driveway, and from a distance of my gate. Later that afternoon, I received an email from the compliance office. Attached was a digital copy of the full report. It included timestamps, language from Clause 14 FAF, and yes, several stills pulled directly from my carport security footage. It was all there, documented, filed, permanent. The following week, the HOA issued a printed apology. It was short, clinical, and clearly written under pressure. But Barbara's name was at the bottom in ink. They retracted the meeting space designation, admitted to procedural oversights, promised future meetings would be held in sanctioned common areas as originally intended. I kept the notice, laminated it. In fact, sometimes justice doesn't kick down the door. Sometimes it walks up the street with a clipboard and a camera and reminds everyone who's really watching. The notice was folded like a flyer, dropped unceremoniously in my mailbox. Black ink. No greeting, just a block of dense text labeled Emergency HOA, Assembly, Agenda Item 1, Board Motion to Reconsider Membership Eligibility. Lot 30. They didn't even have the spine to name me. I read it once, then again slower. The wording was vague, but the intent was clear. They wanted me out. Barbara must have thought the public exposure would fade, that the citation from the county would get lost in the shuffle, that I'd retreat behind my gate and disappear. Instead, I printed every legal document I had. I stacked them, hole-punched them, and clipped them neatly into packets with my name on the cover. Then I signed up to run. The HOA rules, ironically, allowed any dues-paying resident to declare candidacy with 48 hours notice. So I submitted the form, attached my binder of exhibits, and delivered a copy to each board member's mailbox. I didn't campaign with smiles or cookies. I didn't host meet and greets or go door-to-door with platitudes. I let the evidence speak. The zoning violations, the false claims, the footage, the forced apology. By the time the emergency meeting began, the clubhouse, yes, the real sanctioned meeting space, was full. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months showed up. Some brought lawn chairs, others stood in the back, arms folded, eyes sharp. They weren't angry, they were waiting. Barbara opened with her usual bravado, trying to spin the vote as a matter of restoring order and protecting community values. But the words fell flat. The room was too quiet, too aware. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't posture. I placed my binder on the table, opened to Clause 14 FOF, and read it aloud. Then I read the violation code. The cease and desist. The apology. When I finished, I looked up, not at the board, but at the people. I don't want control, I said. I want clarity, and I want boundaries respected, not rewritten behind closed doors. The ballots were anonymous, but the results were loud. By the end of the night, I wasn't just a homeowner with a locked gate. I was the newly elected president of the Oak Crest HOA, by majority vote. Barbara didn't speak when the results were announced. She stood, lips pressed tight, and removed her nameplate from the table. She didn't look back as she walked out. No one clapped. No one needed to. Because the shift wasn't about applause. It was about accountability. And it had finally arrived. The first meeting I ran as president was quiet. No chaos. No folding chairs, scraping over concrete. No territorial speeches masked as policy talk. Just a clean room in the community center, fresh coffee in the corner, and a stack of agendas that fit on a single page. I brought my own chairs. Not because I had to, but because it mattered. I set them up in rows, neatly, evenly spaced, enough for anyone who wanted to listen, speak, or vote. There were no power plays, no whispered corners, just neighbors in a room. Finally heard. I opened the meeting with the very bylaw they tried to ignore, Clause 14, tough. And then I introduced a motion to require written homeowner consent for any use of property for HOA-related activity. No exceptions, no ambiguities. It passed without objection. When I returned home that night, I stood in front of my carport for a long while. It was quiet again. The kind of quiet I remembered from before. Honest and still. No leftover snack wrappers. No echoes of unwanted voices. Just my tools, my bench, the faint creak of the wind against the siding. I hung a small plaque just above the keypad gate. Private property. No meetings without consent. No threats. No exclamation points. Just a statement. Final. Clear. I didn't tear down what they built. I didn't scream until someone listened. I rewrote the rules they used against me and placed the crown back where it belonged. Not on a person, but on principle. They built their kingdom in my carport. I just reclaimed the land. Ever had an HOA cross the line? Ever watched power hide behind paperwork? Then you already know this isn't just a story, it's a blueprint. Stick around. The next battle might look a lot like your block. And trust me, you're going to want the playbook.